This is Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Geragos and Adam Carolla.
Yeah, get it on. Got to get on the show. Get on. Welcome to the best hour or so in the universe. It's Reasonable Doubt. Mark Geragos in studio where we love him.
In studio. Love being here. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody, including you.
Yeah, right back at you. Well, so much going on in the
as
world
we're sitting
today.
here, verdicts were just read, right, Gary? Is minutes ago, right?
Yeah. About a half hour ago.
Yeah. The guilty across the board on the case. And I don't think that's a surprise to anybody.
No, I don't. But I do. There's an interesting dynamic, and I'd be interested from your perspective what you think of this phenomenon. There was another verdict. I don't know all the names and even the official particulars, but black man drives back to his garage. Cops are following him. They say reach for a gun. They're closing the door. The cops shot him. Guilty. The cops were guilty on that. We got guilty on not the cops, but the vigilante neighbors on the, is it Ahmaud Arbery?
Right.
Too many names out there.
I think it's Aubrey.
Aubrey.
Ahmaud is correct.
Right. But here's an interesting concept. It's not my own, but I've heard it, which is these are pretty straightforward cases. And in the straightforward ones, at least today, they usually find the cops guilty or the vigilante guys guilty oftentimes on the sort of white on black crime department. And it's interesting that the media is not nearly as interested in those cases, just in terms of coverage. They're much more interested in the Rittenhouse case, coverage-wise, that didn't involve a black person. It's interesting that there's so much more emphasis and coverage on a non kind of race-related one versus a straight-ahead race-related one. A couple of hillbillies shoot a black man who was, jogging maybe
in the neighborhood. I mean,
yeah, right.
By the way, obviously it wasn't covered as intensely as Rittenhouse. But the one thing that was covered was when the defense lawyer was complaining about black pastors coming into the courtroom. Do you remember that? Yeah,
I do remember that aspect of it. Tilt your mic up a little so Gary doesn't go nuts, or lean it up. So, what is the phenomenon of covering Rittenhouse so intensely that does not involve a black victim versus the black victim crimes that are going on simultaneously? I think the one with the garage and the man and the pickup truck and the black deceased, that actually dropped the same day as the Rittenhouse one.
And I believe there was a self-defense aspect to that as well. And part of what aggravates me is the idea that somehow now we're going to revisit this kind of drumbeat of self-defense. Mm-hmm. And it makes no sense to me whatsoever. Self-defense has been in the law for centuries. Before there was even a United States justice system, self-defense has its origins in common law out of the UK. And why is it that all of a sudden we're going to redefine self-defense? Self-defense is a high hurdle. You have to show various things depending on your jurisdiction. You can't be the one who provokes. You can't be the one. You can't escalate to a higher level than what is found to be the force used on you. And so there are all kinds of, this is not a gimme. It's not a putt to use self-defense. And so why is there a drumbeat to revisit self-defense when you don't like a verdict in one case? And as you say, there's verdicts on the very same day involving self-defense that got maybe 1/100th of the coverage.
Right. So what is the phenomenon of all the scrutiny on Rittenhouse versus some of these other cases which fit a theme or narrative more closely? Why so much interest in Rittenhouse, I have a theory.
Yeah, let me hear your theory. I love your theories. You know how much I love your theories.
Well, the theory is it's sort of grievance versus justice. You know what I mean? So if you're looking for justice, we have some examples very recently of justice, but you're in the grievance department, not the justice department. And so it's sort of like, we'll bring it to the home front. If your wife said, yeah, you never do anything just because, you're never spontaneous, you're never anything. And you go, well, what about the other day when I brought you home those flowers? And I said, we're going to Catalina for the weekend. Yeah, okay, fine. That was nothing. You know what I mean? Like, moving on. It's like, well, then what do you want? Do you want romance or do you want grievance? Because I can satiate the justice part by giving you examples of justice being served just recently. I mean, since the Rittenhouse thing, one went that day, this one went a few days, a week later, what have you. But if you're in the grievance business, then there is no satiating the justice. Now, you can't announce I'm in the grievance business, just like your wife can't announce she's in the grievance business. She has to go, if you would only do X, Y, or Z. But if you do X, Y, or Z, and there's many examples of you doing X, Y, or Z, and she's still aggrieved, then maybe she is in the grievance business. And furthermore, I think they look at cases like the Rittenhouse case is, the other cases are pretty clean cut, pretty straightforward. Yeah, this is going to go the direction we want it to go. So our work is done. The Rittenhouse case, that's a tough putt. And so we got to mobilize. We got to really get everybody involved with this and see if we can kind of bend a narrative. And the thing that's crazy about it is you see the trial and he wasn't carrying an AR-15 across state lines. And if you turn on the TV set after the trial, there's this thing, this guy brings an AR-15 across state lines. I mean, you know, they do the the case that sort of set it off, the Jacob Blake case.
Right.
Because half the guys are like, they killed Jacob Blake. They shot him in the back. They kill a black man. Then BLM, it's like, he's alive. How much boot work do you have to do to figure out if a guy's alive or not? He's doing interviews.
But see, it's just part of my complaint has always been is just there is no coverage of or accurate coverage of the criminal justice system. I guess where I would take your theory is when they can manufacture outrage in order to get eyeballs, that seems to be what happens. Also yesterday, Gary may be able to find this, there was a gentleman who for 42 years has been in custody in, I believe, which state, Gary? He was released, I believe, yesterday. Was
Kevin Strickland. It was in Missouri.
Missouri, that's what I thought. This case, to me, you want to get outraged? Guy's been in custody for 42 years. Basically, the Innocence Project comes along and shows that this guy is innocent. Clearly, it was a manufactured conviction. He's now in a wheelchair. When the governor was presented with the facts, governor refused to even commute the sentence. Mind you, he's been in for 42 frickin' years.
A murder he didn't commit?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Three. And has maintained his innocence all along. God forbid. And the two other guys who were convicted are out. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct.
Right,
yes.
because they embrace their guilt, so they're out. The guy who embraces or protests his innocence is in. If I understand correctly, they actually had to pass a law in order to get the prosecutor to have discretion to dismiss the case, to kind of get jurisdiction to dismiss the case. Prosecutor apparently didn't even have that jurisdiction. Why that is not wall-to-wall for 2 years is beyond me.
Yeah.
But I wake up this morning to a picture of Rittenhouse thumbs up with Trump that was tweeted by Don Jr., and that sends Twitter sphere into the stratosphere like nothing. I mean, it was astonishing to me. And to me, okay, the guy used self-defense. By the way, my feeling is Kyle Rittenhouse, the reason he was acquitted was not because of white privilege per se. It was because he had resources, because he had a frontline criminal defense lawyer, he had jury consultants, he had experts, which evened out, as I've said to you before, which evened out the playing field from the prosecution, who always has all of the resources against whoever the defendant is. And why is it that there isn't, that people aren't clamoring for the governor to resign in Missouri because he wouldn't commute an innocent man's sentence? Why isn't there some focus on that kind of stuff? Why aren't people talking? Why isn't it a discussion of all the people who've walked out of jail who were innocent, and how do you pay those people back?
Well, here's a question you're uniquely qualified to answer. We're right in the middle of this period where people are talking about reform, justice reform, as it pertains to race and overall just sort of justice reform. So that's sort of one half of the argument. The other half is they've elected all these progressive DAs in a lot of these blue states, and their sort of approach to it seems to be the approach to, why are test scores lower in this group or that group? Well, get rid of the test, which doesn't lead to smarter students and higher participation in college. It just it devolves into sort of a chaos. So a lot of Los Angeles has this a little bit. San Francisco has this, maybe Chicago. They get George Soros dumps a bunch of money into the campaign. We get these progressive guys in there. They go, look, we're gonna lower the incarceration rate by looking the other way or lower. You see the Kenosha thing with the guy, not Kenosha, but the Waukegan, the guy driving the SUV, driving it through the parade and stuff like that. Then you got the other side, which is outrage, where look at what's going on in these cities now. These stores are packing up and moving. They're shuttering. They're not coming back. Where's the balance? Well, how do we figure this out?
It's interesting you mentioned that. Yesterday's, for those who haven't watched or listened to our show that we dropped yesterday, we had on Mr. Watkins, and that was fascinating to me. And your interplay with him was fascinating to me. I had two other lawyers in the office when I recorded it. I wasn't even talking. I was just listening to the two of you.
They probably thought you had a stroke or something. Mark's in his office, and we don't hear any yelling coming from underneath the door.
But there's some. I was going to ask
beating
Gary
off for sure. Don't go in there.
He brought up what is, I think, one of the most salient points. I mean, Gary, maybe you could excerpt part of it because it's worth another watch. Part of what has happened in the criminal justice system, and we talk about the progressive prosecutors and I've been very supportive of the idea that you need progressive prosecutors because the lock them up and throw away the key, warehouse them for 40 years, 50 years, these crazy sentences that have been doled out over the last, statistically doesn't work. However, and I was a supporter of Prop 47, which now law enforcement uses as they blame some of what's happening in the streets on Prop 47. That Prop 47 was basically a more lenient treatment of low-level crime. And so I think that what we were talking about yesterday really it pinpoints what the problem is. The criminal justice system has been hijacked and is now the mental health system, and it is not designed to be that. And we don't treat mental health in any semblance, way, shape, or form the way it should be treated. And we end up also not distinguishing between people who are committing a crime for venal or greedy motives as opposed to somebody who is unhinged or is in the midst of a mental health crisis. And so when you have I was thinking about this also today because Gary sent over, I guess looting now has been determined to be a loaded term. You can't use the term looting.
It's racially biased.
Yeah.
Right.
And I was thinking, well, actually, there's a more fundamental distinction that I think you can make. Looting that is opportunistic in terms of kind of a breakdown of the social structure in a, whatever you want to call it, a civil unrest, a riot, whatever label you want to put on it, to me is fundamentally different than what we're seeing now with these organized crime kind of invasions of high-end stores. That, to me, is different.
Well, I think it's the difference between manslaughter and murder. You know, traditionally, looting would happen when there'd be a protest, unrest, people take to the streets. At some point, somebody would grab a old paper dispenser for the Herald Examiner or something and throw it through the window of an electronics shop. And then at some point, people would spill in and grab themselves some stereo equipment. But that was sort of targets of opportunity. And that was kind of manslaughter. It's still a crime.
Right. It's
but
impulsive.
manslaughter.
There's an impulse
now we're taking off our license plates. We're getting our hammers and picks. And a convoy's coming to the town. And we're going to hit the Louis Vuitton store. Now, that's murder because that's premeditated.
Right. It's got the malice element, meaning that there's the reflection and there's the intent, as opposed to somebody who's in the, a Dr. Alien or a Thursday guy who's in the throes of complete mental disintegration, for lack of a better term, and doesn't even understand. I mean, it's like when I'm talking with the AirPods in my ears. Am I, hearing voices or?
But to the layperson, meaning me, it seems very easy. I mean, certainly as a concerned citizen, guy comes before the court and he stole fun-sized sack of Cheetos, and then he defecated in the park, and then he pushed a cop's horse or something. I'm like, all right, that guy needs help. I don't need him, in the hole, per se. And then there's the other guy, and the other guy tried to choke his girlfriend, and then when a concerned neighbor got involved, he threw a bottle at him. Like, okay, that guy's putting his hands on people. I do want that guy put in a place where we can keep an eye on him. It seems pretty straightforward. If you say to me, we got this guy, should we put him in prison or should we do some sort of outreach program or something? I'd go, well, what the fuck did he do? And if you say, well, he was on a subway and he was hitting people with a ball-peen hammer, I go, oh, God, that guy's got to go somewhere. I can't have that guy running around. And if you go, what'd the other guy do? He embezzled or he stole or he's a junkie and he went to his parents' house and emptied out his dad's urn and tried to sell it to a pawn shop. I go, that guy doesn't pose a threat to me. You know what I'm saying?
It's you would think that you could do that kind of triage and understand. I've got a client right now.
I felt the same about Martha Stewart, by the way. What's her name? Aunt Becky from Full House. I'm like, these people need to go somewhere? Like, she's trying to get her fucking kid she doctored a crew team picture to get her kid in USC. What? Why she need to go somewhere? Now, that goes against the theme. It's kind of interesting.
Wait.
The theme is we don't want low-level offenders going somewhere. Well, look no further than Aunt Becky. But the point is that's not what we're talking about. Her dad's, her husband's rich. But it seems pretty straightforward. Put your hands on somebody, go somewhere. Steal something, I don't need you to go somewhere.
Right, and what is behind the stealing something? I mean, that's another question. Is it?
Well, I think we're getting into slippery slope areas now, because if you really think about any crime, and you start, in a way, it's kind of self-defense. It's like, well, why did they steal something? And you go, well, their kid was hungry. And then you have to kind of go, well, then it's okay to steal something. We're getting into the ether a little bit because then everyone's going to go, well, yeah, I stole a handbag. Well, it wasn't to feed my kid, but then I was going to sell the handbag on eBay to get the money to feed my kid. It gets tough as you start getting into motivation.
And then what do you do? You know, the San Francisco situation is a difficult one. You've got businesses who provide the tax base for the city, and you have businesses that are shuttering because they can't deal with the loss prevention.
Right.
And the last thing they want to do is they don't want to be sued if they use excessive force, so they're pulling back, and then they're just shutting down. And that's
well,
a
also
problem.
like what are the optics like if young black teenage boy comes into your store and all of a sudden you've got guy there with shotgun, and it's like now we're talking bad optics with possible who knows what goes down if the shit really goes down.
I'm old enough to remember the Korean grocer who shot the young African-American girl that caused a ruckus here 30 years ago in L.A.
Yeah.
Quite a...
So what do you do? Well, let's just take San Francisco. And by the way, I'm old enough to remember the only news I heard out of San Francisco when I was growing up was Rice-A-Roni commercials. It was the San Francisco treat. And I was like, look at that utopia. Look at the street cars
what was
and everything.
the Michael Douglas show with
Streets
Carl
of San
Malden?
Francisco.
Streets of San Francisco.
I got that, and I got my Rice-A-Roni commercials, and it seemed like a nice place to live and raise a family. So you have the progressive DAs. You have a kind of version of defund the police in terms of what is going to happen if you do not crack down on crime. Well, the message will get out that this is something we can do, and then you'll have these mobs rolling into town with their plates deleted and their pickaxes grabbing some loot, but not looting, just grabbing loot. So what is...
I think
how shall we remedy this?
Well, I've said all along that if you want real criminal justice reform, I'm of the idea that you've got to reimagine what the criminal justice system is supposed to be. It can't be, unless you're going to do a complete 180. It cannot be the mental health safety net. I mean, it's just not equipped for that. Cops are, they go through the academy, they're taught certain things. You can't teach a guy off the street or a woman off the street in whatever period of time. How many days? 42 days is the academy. 180 days is the academy. You're not going to teach that. I mean, it takes years to get people skilled in mental health. So instead of saying defund the police, how about fund mental health? How about fund what? Because I will tell you, at least anecdotally, one of the things that's come out of this pandemic, and I say this every day, is it has exacerbated mental health issues in a way that I've never seen in the last 50 years. I don't know about you.
Certainly statistically. You know, I mean, you hear about suicides, hear about drug ODs. I mean, I think we had one of the highest, maybe 100,000 drug ODs this year, statistically higher than any other year.
The number of
it.
suicides of kids, my kids' age, is frightening to me. I mean, yet again, another one recently, and it's just and an OD death for somebody who's even younger. It has exacerbated an issue that doesn't get enough attention or resources to begin with.
I think it's tantamount to the homeless issue in terms of the mental resource department is, you know, you're calling these people criminals or you're calling these people homeless. But we all know that giving them a home is not going to solve the problem. They have major, major issues. And so first thing you have to do is go, what's the root cause of the problem? If it's mental illness, then building low-cost housing is fine, but it doesn't get to the root, which is mental illness. Why aren't we focusing and putting resources toward that?
When I leave here, I'm going to go to the office. I'm going to get off on Wilshire Boulevard to get to the office, and I'm going to go a block. On the off-ramp, you're going to go a block, a full city block, maybe longer, right over the freeway, of an encampment.
Under the freeway or over?
Over the freeway.
Yeah.
And of an encampment. It literally strings along between 6th and Wilshire. And it's astonishing to look at. It reminds me of why my father used to say he didn't like going to Mexico because of the dichotomy. But this does not, if you walk and talk to the people who are there, which I've done on many occasions, this is not a poverty problem. This is not a home problem. I mean, there's shelter, they're building shelter. It's a mental illness issue. And apparently you can't say that. I mean, I'm chastised every time I say that.
These people are, by the way, the advocates. First off, who the fuck anointed you a homeless advocate? And as I've said, I got a dog. His name is Phil. I'm an advocate for Phil. I love Phil. I want to take care of Phil. I'm not a veterinarian. I have no business solving Phil's tumor problem or giving him expressing his anal glands or anything. I'm just an advocate for him. But doesn't mean I fucking know what I'm doing.
I agree.
I don't people
either,
anoint themselves. I'm the homeless czar. It's like, who are you again? Like, I speak for all these people that have flopped in the park. Like, how come you speak for these people?
What I don't understand, how is it that every experience almost uniformly that I run into in downtown LA and in Venice Beach are people who really don't. It isn't that they can't find shelter. They don't want the conditions linked to the shelter. And they're obviously, having been around enough people with mental health challenges all my life and professionally, it's obvious that these are people who are in the midst of a mental health crisis. To anybody who's there, talk to anybody who deals with them, with the people who are on the streets. These are not, for the most part. Yes, there are exceptions. I'm sure there's 10%, whatever percentage you want to ascribe to people who have slipped or fallen through the safety net. I give you that. But the hardcore people who I see every day are people who are in the throes of a mental health degeneration.
Yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon, which is, first off, when Gavin Newsom tells you about the face of homelessness, it's not mental illness, it's not drug addiction, it's the mother of 3 and the bookbindery she worked at shut down, and now she's forced to. Listen, you don't need to look at data, statistics, you don't need to interview anyone. We all come from a very diverse background and different income levels. Does anyone know a human being that, minus any mental issues and minus any substance issues, just lost their job and physically went and slept on the pavement? Like, just literally just said, I'm going down the Laurel Canyon where the 101 is, and I shall pitch a tent or lay some cardboard down, and I shall go to bed there tonight. Does anyone know that human being? Have you heard of that human being? Did you go to high school with that human being? If the answer is fucking no, well, then that's not the problem. Well,
the city councilman for Venice, whose name I've got a mental block on, keeps saying he was homeless. Well, when you drill down on it, turns out he was kind of couch surfing.
Right.
Right?
Bonning?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but it's become a badge of distinction. And I'm sure that we could find people who have to live in their car because they've lost their job or and they've got kids there. I get that exists. You can always come up with an example of somebody like that. But I would submit that is the outlier.
Of course it is.
And I don't understand what happened or where we got to the point where you cannot address this subject without being chastised. Why it is when you and I talk about, hey, I think this is more mental health than housing. Why do we get chastised for that? Why is that blasphemy?
Well, it's a kind of new world order we're living in, which is you want to discuss the problem and solving the problem. They want to argue over labeling of the problem, which never really gets you to the problem.
Yeah,
So
it's kind of like a wall that's been erected.
Yeah, well, speaking of wall, we kind of do this with the border. So somebody says, hey, we'd like to control the border, and then you start arguing over who's coming across and what's coming across, root causes, systemic this and that. You never really get to the border. It's a filibustering in a weird way. If you think about what's going on with the homeless in L.A., we haven't been arguing over what to do with the homeless. We've been arguing over what to call the homeless and what the root causes are of homeless and how not to label the homeless. And those are the discussions. It's funny. It's diabolical if you don't want to get to the homeless.
Diabolical is the perfect word, because if you really want to address this issue and you really want to grapple with it, then have a honest, transparent discussion.
Look no further than our own Dr. Drew, when somebody appointed him or suggested that he join
Catherine Barger was going to put him on the commission.
Right.
And God forbid that a guy who has spent his entire adult life grappling with these issues in an intelligent, thoughtful, deep, honest way. And he was pilloried.
Right. Now, the L.A. Times pilloried him. So does the L.A. Times want to solve homelessness is the question, or do they want to argue over what to do about homelessness? If you think about it, I think you can draw the conclusion that they do not want to solve. If you don't want Dr. Drew to volunteer his time in a group that has no history, I mean, a group of 6 or 7 council members who have no addiction medicine specialties and no degrees. They got a degree in Chicano studies from Valley College up on the fucking wall, but they have no expertise in this population. And somebody has joined. It's basically like saying, you guys are running a failing company. You have no MBAs in this. There's no attorneys. There's no accountants. Your company's failing. Hey, good news. There's a guy who's a finance expert, an economist, and an MBA. He says he's going to volunteer his time to counsel you guys and help you get your company right. And we go, we don't want that guy in the building. Are you trying to run a company?
We don't want him. We're going to shun him. We're gonna push him off the balcony.
Then the question must be asked next. He's volunteering his time. He has expertise. Do you not want this company to be profitable?
Well, back to your analogy about how you're an advocate for Phil, you don't draw a salary to do that. If you were paid mid-6 figures to do that, you probably
that's a good point.
Be interested in it.
That's right.
So do you want the problem to go away? Because then there's no need for an advocate, and then you're out of a gig.
Yeah, they're essentially guys who pick up garbage at the park who, whenever there's no one around, there's a do not litter sign, and they spray paint over it because that's job security. Do you have I wanted to play the clip of Whoopi on The View for Mark. I'll do a spot. It's interesting. It's a feelings-based society we're living in now, and I'll have Gary cue that up. I'll do a spot first. But I'm curious about this because in the, self-defense is a definable defense, and it's given out that you get a lawyer, we go at it, the judge weighs in, and then the jury renders a thing. But that's no longer good enough for the ladies on The View. They don't like that system. I don't know.
I'd love to see.
Oh,
it's
it's
awesome.
Ready
after the spot.
All right, I'll tell you about Fight Camp. Want to learn how to box or kickbox from real fighters? Fight Camp brings the boxing and kickboxing gym right to your home. Full body workouts you actually look forward to, and a free standing punching bag, so you don't have to swing it from the rafters up there. It'll take your hardest hits. Made for beginners all the way up to experienced boxers. You can learn from 6 highly trained, qualified trainers. It comes with all the gear you need, including the punching bag, freestanding punching bag, boxing gloves, quick hand wraps, and punch tracking sensors to measure your speed, volume, and your output. It's a great workout. Good for we're talking about the good for you mentally as well. Better than just, pedaling endlessly or running on a treadmill. You learn a skill. You kind of engage your mind. Great for kids. No heavy weights, no spinning wheels to get them caught up in. It's Fight Camp, right, Gary?
That's right. You can pay for your Fight Camp over 24 months for less than the cost of a boxing gym and get it right away. Plus, Fight Camp offers free shipping with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Just go to joinfightcamp.com/doubt. To get free shipping on Fight Camp, go to joinfightcamp.com/doubt. joinfightcamp.com/doubt.
All right, so
I always, in the interest of full disclosure, I haven't seen this yet, but on the screen is one of my closest friends in the world, which is Sonny Hostin. Yeah.
all right, here we go. Whoopi's got thoughts. Sonny's an attorney, right?
Yeah, Sonny's a former prosecutor. She's got a real skill set. I always said she was a prosecutor an AUSA, but she was in D.C., the District of Columbia. They've got a superior court there where they do like what I would call similar to the criminal courts building here in L.A. I mean, it's a street crime kind of a practice there.
All right, here we go.
Well, let me show you what got me, the thing that no one really was talking about. The father of Anthony Huber, one of the young men shot and killed by Rittenhouse, put things into perspective, for me at least, and on CNN. Take a look.
You know, that guy gets to run free, and he's now a hero. And this is my son right here. This is Anthony.
It's an urn.
You know, we lost our son. And there's no justice right now for our family, and there's no closure. And there wasn't going to be justice in that Kenosha court with that judge.
And now he wasn't doing anything.
Right.
He was he saw an active shooter.
Right.
You know, he saw someone get shot. He thought he was doing the right thing.
That's right.
Yeah. So even all the excuses in the world does not change the fact that 3 people got shot.
Yeah.
2 people were murdered.
Yeah.
To me, it's murder. I'm sorry.
By the way, if they, for the fucking show's an hour long, if they took cogent thoughts and just distilled it down to that, it'd be less than 30 seconds. So like 3 people are, I know. We all know. And nothing's going to bring them back. I get it. And everyone hates the judge
right
now because it didn't go the way Whoopi go.
And by the way, the father of the young man has got a point. He didn't get justice. I get it.
I will say this, though, for the people who hate Kyle Rittenhouse for his vigilante, whatever, then they praise the guy who was involved in his own vigilante, whatever, which is that guy's got a gun, hit him with a skateboard. I mean, you're basically saying to Rittenhouse, hang back, this would have never happened. I'll take that same argument and apply it to your son. Hang back with your skateboard and don't attack the guy at the AR-15 who's trying to flee to the cops. Hang back, you'd still be alive.
Well, also, the system is designed to you assess, the jurors are assessing the mental state of the person who is accused, Rittenhouse. Jurors are not to assess the mental state of the deceased. That might be for a civil case brought on behalf of them. But let's understand, you can't be all things to all people in one case that's brought against Rittenhouse in the criminal courts. If you want justice and your position is that my son died because he thought it was an active shooter, then you've got a hell of a case to bring in the civil courthouse against Rittenhouse or against somebody else who assisted Rittenhouse. That's the appropriate spot to do it. Instead of kind of this just a mishmash of thoughts that one doesn't have to do with the other. Just, yes, 3 people were shot. Absolutely. And by the way, what you're complaining about, he wasn't held accountable. I beg to differ. He was there. His life was on the line. He was accused. He had to go through a trial. That's what you mean by accountability. If you're saying he wasn't punished, that's a different argument. Yeah, he wasn't punished because he wasn't convicted. Was he punished because he was in custody for 87 days? that's a different discussion. So it really is kind of all of this whirlwind of just combining or mishmash of ideas that really doesn't have a legal analysis.
I know you like Sonny, but as an attorney in the group of cackling yentas, doesn't she have a fiduciary duty to coach up Whoopi a little bit?
Well, when I if I
was sitting here and Gary, Gary said, "Hey, Mark, Adam stole my car," and I was like, "Well, it's in my driveway, and possession is 9/10 of the law, bitch." I feel like at some point Mark would have to put on his legal hat, his powdered wig, and chime in and go, "Adam, I know you say that, but legally you do have to give him his car back."
Sonny and I used to. It's interesting that we're talking about her because when we kind of bonded was over the Trayvon Martin case, and she was actually down there that was when she was with CNN, I was with CNN, and we would have nightly arguments about the case. I mean, I started teasing her that she had a crush on the prosecutor because she McDreamy, and she comes to the criminal justice system with the ex-prosecutor view. And I get that. I mean, ex-prosecutors see their vision. I obviously come with the criminal defense view. But I don't know that a prosecutor can understand, unless they've done both sides. And this brings me to another kind of point that we've talked about years ago, but my father used to say that we could take for the secular, I should say, not the criminal military system. In the military system, somebody could be a prosecutor one day and then could be a defense lawyer the next day. And you didn't get wedded to one side or the other. And he used to say that was one of the great things. He was somebody who was 13 years a prosecutor, and then he was 20 some odd years as a defense lawyer. You don't get so wedded to your viewpoint when you have to be on both sides of this. Sure. And I don't think that ex-prosecutors who haven't had clients adequately understand the challenges of being in the system and having somebody ground up in the system, because that's what it is.
Do you, last thought, I think Rittenhouse has some civil stuff he's going to be moving toward. Everyone is speculating. I think the Biden thing seems to be a little bit of a bridge too far, according to Mark and many others. Some think there's some plausibility there, feasibility. But he certainly is going to be going after the MSNBCs and the CNNs and whoever's, calling him a marauding racist out on a hunting spree and all that kind of stuff. Seems like the prosecutor in the case may have had a couple of faux pas as well. Is there going to be a look at him, sort of a la Mike Nifong, with the Duke lacrosse situation?
I don't think so. I mean, who knows? But when you take a look at the case we just talked about, where a guy was in for 42 years, when you take a look at I think somebody just told me that there were 600 instances of prosecutorial misconduct, and there was only 10 instances where there was any kind of consequence to that. I just don't think the high bar of qualified immunity, the high bar of basically they can do what they want. It's just you just don't see any kind of what I would call accountability.
Gary wrote on the screen. There's Biden, and then there's the Biden campaign, and it was the campaign that had the featured Rittenhouse when they were doing the white supremacy jag. If there's nothing against Biden personally, is there going to the war chest, going to the campaign, whoever's in charge or whoever put video together?
If somebody puts something together, somebody obviously being a lawyer, if somebody could connect the dots, the campaign, I wouldn't rule that out. I just think that given the history of DOJ substituting in whenever there's a president who says something, and most recently it was with Trump, and before that it was with Obama. I think the law is kind of murky in that area.
Where do you come down on this? So we've seen it with the Nick Sandmann thing we talk about all the time. Folks are having to cut checks now. They have the Rittenhouse case. There's discussion as the case is going on that, there's going to be a civil. If he wins this thing, he's going to be going after someone a la Nick Sandmann. There's many similarities. All right. So there's precedent. Like it's understood. And CNN cut a check. And so then the verdict comes in. He's acquitted on all charges. And he's a free man. And then everyone goes, all right, well, next step, he's going to lawyer up and he's going to start going after these entities, MSNBC, CNN, what have you. And then 2 or 3 days later, you see the person on MSNBC and they go, this racist gets dropped off by his mom. He's got himself a loaded AR-15, goes in hunting. Why isn't whoever's in charge over at MSNBC going, hey, I don't want to cut a check to this guy. Like, we don't need 1,000 hours of footage of you calling him a racist. And by the way, the verdict's been rendered. He's out now. He's got a lawyer.
I would assume,
fucking zip it a little, would you?
I would assume that somebody has made the determination that the difference between Nick Sandmann is he was not criminally prosecuted, there was no probable cause finding, and that in Rittenhouse's case there was a criminal case, and that there was a probable cause finding. And when there's a probable cause finding, that raises the bar on for how he could get any redress. That would be my completely speculative analysis.
What about the fact that he's calling out his former lawyers by name multiple times in that Tucker Carlson interview? I mean, he must have said Lin Wood's name 5 times in the course of 4 sentences.
And John Pierce.
Yeah, and John Pierce. So does that indicate to you that he's going to be civilly going after them as well?
I think that there's no question that he's aiming for them. I mean, Lin is not somebody who shies away from defamation, when that's his specialty. And
he's going to ironically go after some of that Nicholas Sandmann money that Lin Wood got.
Comes full circle. I hadn't even thought of that.
Last Flip the Script, you were talking about, he was prosecuted for a crime, and that gives you some umbrella of safety if you're a commentator. If I was his lawyer, I would say, I'm going to flip the script and say Sandmann didn't have to go to court to fight for his life.
Yeah.
You were calling him a racist. You were poisoning the jury pool. This 18-year-old could have spent the rest of his life rotting in prison because of people like you spreading these lies.
Well, one of the things that gets you around that probable cause finding in terms of your immunities is if you used bad information or lied or suborned or did anything that infected the probable cause finding. Arguably, that there's a case that could be constructed. That's what happened here when they talk about the discovery, which was compressed in a different form. When there were statements that the video. Right. When there were statements that were made that may not have been turned over. When there was prosecutorial misconduct. If that predates the probable cause finding, there's some real issues there that somebody who wants to unpack that could have some fun with.
Well, I think that draws the end of this episode. Always good to have you in studio.
Always good to be here in studio and see Gary's smiling face.
You can go to AdamCarolla.com for live shows everywhere. Truth Yeller, my new special on the Daily Wire, is going to drop any day now. Leno's going to be the first guest, and then Rob Riggle's the second. You can go to dailywire.com/Adam. Look for that, and you can check out our Pluto channel, our chassis channel on Pluto TV 687 for all the docs and all the car movies and all the going racing with Adam Carolla. Mark, what do you have?
We've got Gigi's down at the V Palm Springs. Stop by there. It's really starting to be the place in Palm Springs. We've got Casa Tropicana down at St. Clemente, Gary's favorite haunt. And come downtown. I'll take you on a tour of the engine company and Tenny Mediterranean Tapas, and maybe we'll see Dr. Alien while we're down there.
So until next time, Adam Carolla for Mark Geragos saying mahala.
Thanks for listening to Reasonable Doubt. Tune in next Saturday for an all-new episode.